I got a new nickname from my friend Richard Urso. Rocky. This is Rocky right here. You don't want to be in the ring with this guy. He's a fighter. And that's great. God bless you, Rich. Listen, we're going to get ready for the final panel. And then this is kind of a risk, but we're bringing everybody up who spoke. So we got somebody, if somebody can set up these 9 chairs behind me. And those of you who want, and really physicians first, okay? There may be 1 or 2 leftovers, but any physicians that have questions, please line up here. Anyone who spoke this morning, and once they're up here, I'd like to bring up Valerie Strickland, Ed Todd, and Bridget Smith. After we get this situated. Okay, which there's 9 chairs, good. That's going to work. Thank you. Every doctor who spoke this morning of the panelists, and while they're getting this set up, I want to tell you 1 or 2 quick things. 13,000, you've heard that number a lot today, 13,000. Do you recognize those are only the physicians who felt free enough to sign the declaration and put their names to it? Do you represent, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Do you know how many physicians contact me day in and day out and say, I would love to sign the declaration, but I work for this hospital or that hospital, and if I do it, I'm worried about losing my job, okay? So please recognize we have more than 13,000 folks out there that support us in the medical profession. And also, when we talked about going to Global COVID Summit before, do you all realize that Google, really right after we came back from San Juan, if you Googled Global COVID Summit, it went to a Joe Biden Global COVID Summit, which never occurred. So Google redirected us to that. So you can't use Google as a search engine. You probably already know that if you've been following Google. One other thing about the events tonight, we're going to have, this is great, we decided that thanks to the generosity of the World Equestrian Center and the Expo Center, can we give a hand to everybody who helped with that? And thank you all for finding us. We're going to stay a little longer today, not more than a half hour. But we are going to have that VIP event immediately after this in the 2 back rooms. We're going to be dividing up the doctors. And then the event this evening, if you have not signed up, if you're a physician in Florida, please let me go. So just real quick, can I have Ed and Bridget and, where are you? You guys come up here. And Valerie. And would all the physicians please stand behind them? This is really important. I want to get and Kathleen, come up here, get a picture of these really cool folks, and Ellen and PG, all right? Now they just represent, I just want to let you know, especially right here in the scrubs, Bridget Smith is a trauma nurse at Ocala Regional. She worked all night last night, and she's going to work all night tonight. And she saves lives. But when she heard we were doing this, she pulled together Valerie Strickland and Ed Todd, who's a PA, and his wife, and everything you're seeing here, and PG have really done this. I'm a doc. They did the work. Thank you all for this. So get the pictures with the group. You deserve it. All right. Thank you very much. God bless you all. This is great. Great town, Ocala. All right. So let's get on to the QA, guys. Sit down. I know we have a lot of folks here. I'm going to try to make the questions brief because I think everyone who comes deserves to ask, and then we're going to go from there. First question. Is it on? Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. Ed's got it.
You hear me now? Hi, Robin Openshaw. I'm one of the 350,000 people who fled our socialist states and came to the state of Florida this year. I'm a clinical psychologist, MSW. And I just have a question for you, anyone willing to answer this. And when I was in grad school, got my dream internship at a psychiatric hospital, and I got the flu shot because I was required to. And I spent 4 years in bed. I had 2 little children, one of whom was already injured. Didn't figure it out till I got him the second MMR jab, that was what had him in and out of hospitals. But I spent 4 years in bed after the flu vaccine. And I wonder if some of you would consider that this has been going on since long before COVID. And I know that we were taught in med school, safe and effective. I know that. But I'm on a stage with about half of you in Tampa in 2 weeks, and I just want to point out that a lot of your audience is here because we're the people they call the anti-vaxxers. We're actually just the vaccine injured. So I know this is new to so many of you, and I thank you for everything that you're doing, and thank you. But
so basically, you're addressing the idea: has the vaccine industry had a track record of doing things that present more harm than benefit? Who really wants to handle that question? We got a couple of answers. All right. How about the vaccinologist, Dr. Malone?
Testing.
Give me the dead one.
That one's dead. Thank you. I had an educational opportunity with the reporter from One American News just earlier today. When I mentioned Bobby Kennedy, he started slamming him. He's just an anti-vaxxer. I said, no. He's an attorney. He won a major case against Monsanto over Roundup. He was a world leader in the importance of water health. He is personally a vaccine-injured person, and he, like me, we have common ground in the importance of safety, bioethics, and well-established methods for ensuring that we have safe and effective products, whether they're vaccines or drugs. And I personally, I've spent 30 years as a vaccine developer. This RNA stuff is my platform technology. But that doesn't mean that I'm willing to distort common norms in bioethics and responsible, safe product development. I personally strongly object to this pejorative label that's been applied to you, to my respected friend Robert Kennedy, and everyone else. It is so convenient to label you and then throw you away. And many of us here have experienced this behavior of the legacy media. And the last thing I want to say on that point, I mean, we've seen the complete failure of our public health system now. We've also had the complete failure of integrity exposed in our established media. And the only way that I believe we get through both of those things is people like you, the podcasters, folks that have, in a decentralized way, an opportunity to speak your own truth to your own communities and build clinics and, build a successor operation for this distorted public health care system that we have right now. That's the future, and I want to thank you for what you said.
That's a great question. Any other one, Ryan?
Yeah, real quick, I just want to say you cannot find that for which you do not look. And so much of our data is captured and ghostwritten and funded by pharma and funded by the people that are wanting to get their products on the market. And it's so important to look with a skeptical eye. And if someone says it's happening, we as physicians and clinicians are responsible to believe them until proven otherwise. It's the French legal system, guilty until proven innocent with these products. That's why we don't put these in our children. And I'm not anti-vax. I've had all my vaccines. My kids have. Thankfully, I'm not injured. My soul is for what I'm seeing happen to our children. French legal system. These are guilty now until proven innocent, and they have not been proven innocent. So Robin is right, and we need to believe the patient. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Gessling.
I just want to say one quick statistic that I heard recently, and probably about 5 to 7 years ago, the number was approximately 5% considered anti-vaxxers, that derogatory term, and people are waking up. That number is over 20% of the population at this point. So we have strength in numbers where we get to talk about our injuries, where we get to talk about our concerns for safety, and don't be afraid at this point to say what has happened to you.
Yes, and in fact, I guess I could say this, one thing we've discussed, this whole campaign against freedom has backfired. Because my patients, I'm not sure about the rest of you, but my patients are now more distrusting of the pharmaceutical industry and the vaccine industry than ever before. So it's backfired. They don't trust any vaccine or most any drug. And that's probably a healthy skepticism. Next, please.
My name is Angela Akey. I'm an integrative internal medicine primary care doctor just north in Gainesville. And thank you all for your heroism. You all are heroes to me very personally, and thank you all for listening to this. I'll direct my question very directly. I serve 6,000 patients with 3 other healthcare professionals in North Central Florida. We got our ivermectin auditor letter, each one of us, from a big insurance company. I just want practical
Cross Blue Shield.
strategies. I just want practical strategies to move forward. I was going to spend tomorrow getting ready for that audit, so I'd like to hear from the panel what you suggest.
Excellent. Dr. Cole.
An insurance company is not a regulatory agency. Doctors, if they're going to go on a witch hunt for you, since 1997 in federal law, doctors can write drugs off label. Period. If they're going to come after you for a safe, effective antiviral listed in Table 2E of the NIH as an antiviral, then you need to ask them to audit every doctor that uses any drug off-label for any condition ever, and get a good attorney. And that's what I did, and I fired right back at these SOBs.
Excellent. You got it, Dr. Cole. Thank you. That's a great question. Dr. Corey.
Yeah, just there's a document on our website called flccc.net. It's a document that kind of summarizes my lecture. It's called The Totality of the Evidence. It's about 2 pages. It summarizes really what all the studies have concluded. It's probably going to be part of your rebuttal to them, along with what Dr. Cole said. I would offer you that to you.
And so, and how relevant this is, and thank you for asking the question. My office staff is in the back, so Kay, when I told you last week to send those records to Blue Cross Blue Shield, stop, don't do it, please, because we have to regroup, because that's happened to all of us. So thank you very much. Next question, that's great.
Okay, my name is Kathy. I'm not a doctor, but he said that was okay. My question is about a 35-year-old guy, 2 months out from having COVID. He, no early treatment, not real open to any kind of input from anyone else. I've been following you guys all along, and I appreciate that. Okay, so at this point, I mean, he was hospitalized, given remdesivir, and here it is 2 months later. He can do nothing, tachycardia of 150 beats per minute, and has oxygen and can't work. Does I recover? I mean, is it worth it? I mean, what percentage of success?
So 2 things that you said. One is sort of disabling fatigue after recovery is concerning from a long haul perspective. The oxygen may be something different. So I'm a pulmonologist and an intensivist. What this disease actually causes is a condition called organizing pneumonia. I don't want to get into what that is.
That's what they say.
Yeah, and that requires corticosteroids for prolonged duration. So my protocol in hospitalized patients, I do not stop corticosteroids until they're off oxygen, and then I taper over 1 to 2 weeks. So one thought is, and again, I don't know if we can do case by case here, but one thought is that he needs more prolonged and resumption of corticosteroids. The second is he may have some form of long haul if he has other parts of the constellation and symptoms, but your third problem is he doesn't sound like someone who wants more medical care. And that's a harder one to solve, but the iRecover protocol, reasonable to try. We get such nice responses from it. Ivermectin's safe. Someone who's really not functional, again, risk benefit, I would clearly give him a trial at some of the elements on the iRecover protocol.
Even though you're 2 months out?
Of course. Yeah. I've treated people 6 months out and they've responded dramatically.
I just want to emphasize, as an internist and cardiologist, the understanding now that the spike protein is in his body now for 15 months. So there almost certainly is a role for ivermectin because of his anti-spike protein capabilities. I saw Brian Tyson also, he's got more experience than certainly than I do, shake his head that in fact prolonged corticosteroids are needed. That's been my experience. If there's any pleural pericardial symptoms, I use colchicine because in the clinical trials, colchicine was extended at least for a month. I think there's a role for pulmonary rehab. In fact, exercise over time helps, and there's innumerable sources of evidence now. The thing to avoid is hyperglycemia. So, sugary diets, poor diabetic control, whatever the spike protein disease is, it seems to feed on glucose.
Real quick comment, anybody that has fatigue after COVID or the shot, as a laboratory nerd, please check a mononucleosis panel. Because of that toll-like receptor 7 and 8 inhibition, I have seen so much reactivated mononucleosis in the post-COVID patient, long haul, as well as in the post-vaccine injured patient. That is one thing that's critical to check.
Brian, do you think it's possible that ivermectin's treating that?
Yes, ivermectin absolutely will inhibit B-cell turnover that are infected with Epstein-Barr virus.
Yeah,
twice a week,
that's-
0.2 milligrams per kilogram.
That's the
is
question. I know.
fantastically
Yeah.
We know ivermectin has antiviral. I know my friend Dr. Hartman was going to ask that question, even for
Yeah.
treating shingles and other things. It has
So
amazing
I've been
antiviral.
using it for years for that reason. So for Bell's palsy and for shingles. So
There
it's
you go.
it's a great drug. And on the long hauler program, using ivermectin, steroids, and colchicine has been pretty successful. So.
Wow. Amazing stuff you're hearing today, guys. Stick around. You never know what you're going to teach your doctors
And
if you're not a doctor.
fluvoxamine.
All
Yeah.
right, next
Yeah.
question, please.
To Dr. McCullough's point, fluvoxamine as well for any of the neurologic lung symptoms,
Thank
low-dose
you.
fluvoxamine.
Yeah, I would actually go with ciprofloxacin. I think it's better tolerated, and I think it's a better drug than fluvoxamine.
Do you realize that this whole thing is amazing? These kind of conversations have not happened in doctors' lounges for a year and a half. You walk into a doctor's lounge, you try to talk about treatment, you're ostracized. You get out of that lounge. But this is what is not happening, and thank God it's happening now. Amazing. All right, go ahead.
Clearly, the doctors are in the house. Thank you. My name is Nancy Thrower, and I just wanted to thank you for a wonderful day of learning. It was especially beneficial to me because I'm the chairwoman of the Marion County School Board here in Ocala. And I was also a clinical research coordinator into the mid-90s, and I left that field because Big Pharma was, and apparently still is, corrupt. My question is there a preferred, easily accessible antibody test that yields fast, accurate results so that we can get our teachers and other employees back in the classroom?
Amen. Great question, Nancy. We missed this one completely today, guys. All my patients are asking the same question. How can I prove natural immunity? And I could offer you, take it away.
Natural immunity, okay. Antibodies, they always go down. Here's the problem. These tests are all emergency authorized still. The lower level of these were set in the middle of a pandemic. So in my medical laboratory opinion, the bottom of the range is still too high. So people are going to drop below threshold detection. There are apples and orange platforms and tests out there. One of the better ones, more sensitive, is the orthoclinical diagnostics, which the Red Cross is using. There's the Abbott, the Thermo Fisher. Not all of them detect the same. That's the unfortunate aspect of this. More importantly, if you don't have antibodies, most people will, a lot of people won't, do a T-detect test. See if your T-cell fingerprint imprint has been turned on, and there's more T-cell tests coming to the market as well.
Okay, and so let me just explain, and Brian, you may actually, Quest Lab, right, has the SARS spike protein total. I've not checked out LabCorp. And what's amazing is how many people who never got sick. You mentioned, you think, how many of you have had COVID? There's a whole lot of people who never got sick with COVID that have these positive antibodies. So that's the easiest one that I can get, the T-detect. Brian?
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of mention, at our urgent care, we devised a policy to recognize natural immunity. Okay, so we sent all of our staff to go get the quantitative SARS-CoV-2 antibody, and it is through LabCorp, so Quest I think has one, I think LabCorp has one. And what we found was every single one of our employees who had COVID has a high antibody level still. And we're talking even years after being infected.
Over a year, yeah, the SARS, the spike protein antibody. So if your doctors don't know how to order that, please, that's the number one, because it's covered by insurance. The T-detect, at least my patients, they've had to pay cash, a couple of $100 and go online. So that's, if the school board really wants to look for the longer immunity and invest a little bit of money in getting that, they can do that for their employees. Great question.
Yeah,
Thank
there's
you.
one more real quick nerdy thing. So there are two antibodies you can look for, and that's the spike, and then the naturally infective usually will have the nucleocapsid. Now, if you don't have one, you may have the other. So in my medical opinion as a lab director, it's better if you can test for both spike and nucleocapsid, because you may be dropping off one. Our long-term immunity tends to be more robust against that nucleocapsid. So
good to know. Good to know. Because on the drop-down menu in our electronic medical record, you have to pick one. If you can pick two, that's even better. I know we got a question about finances coming up. Thank you, Nancy. Keep them short. You guys are doing great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to follow the money. The theme of my question, following the money. former osteopathic medical student, yada, yada, yada. Now I have my MBA in finance, worked for a national lender. I'm shocked to hear that these hospitals and some are failing when I've seen the tax returns from what's going on out there. Hospital administrators who got a $102,000 bonus last year, actually in Dallas. Seeing how much the insurance companies are incentivizing physicians to have compliance for the shots in their practice. Seeing what the nurses were being offered to roll out. I'm seeing grant money. So how is it, help me understand, an open question, maybe it's a really stupid question. How is it they're failing? I know that they're not getting the higher priced, they weren't coming in and doing the surgeries that made the most money and this, that, and the other. I'm gonna interrupt because we had a great conversation earlier. I'm just gonna leave it at this. How many in this room think it's possible that hospitals made money during the COVID era and more money than they would have otherwise, okay? And how many think it's possible that a patient who had open heart surgery who came in with no COVID symptoms would get swabbed hours before he succumbed to see if he might have COVID? Do you think a hospital might do that? Do you think a hospital might do that at a time when they were short of tests? I had sick nurses working for the hospital who couldn't get the test done because they had a limited supply, but they ran around swabbing the noses of dying patients who did not have COVID symptoms. Do you think hospitals would do that? Yes. Your question's been answered. Thank you very much. God bless you. Keep going.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Alex. I'm an engineer from South Florida. According to a large number of respectable people like Dr. Richard Fleming, Francis Boyle, and at least one of your members on this panel here, I've heard that the SARS-CoV-2 is a result of bioweapons research and funding from the military and things like that. And so I'm wondering about the payload in the virus and in the vaccines or the injections that include the spike glycoprotein, and the actual payload is a GP120 pseudo virus that actually enables it to infect humans, as well as a large number of prions that are in a sequence of proline, arginine, alanine.
I'm only cutting you off because we have the person with us that can best answer that question.
But my question is, how can we detox from the payload, such as the prions and the GP120?
How can we detox from what's been...
And the lipids that are dangerous to many of us.
Okay. I'm going to introduce to you all today for a brief response, Dr. Li Ming, who's here from China, from Hong Kong. And I'll just say she was the first researcher to let the world know what happened in China. And this is why we don't let people know when she's coming. But go ahead, let me answer the question, please, Dr. Li.
I think your question has two parts. The first part, you focus on the bioweapon program things. The second part, you are talking about the toxicity. So let's briefly tell that, yes, this is a novel, unrestricted bioweapon developed by China government and also People's Liberation Army scientists, collaborate with their friends all over the world, but they are the dominants. And these bioweapons, they have put a lot of function to target human inside. I see a lot of people talk about GP120, and also I have identified several functions, including RBD, and also the furin cleavage site, and also potential neurotoxicity, and also antibody-dependent enhancement sites, all like this from the S protein. The thing is, if we don't let China hand off all the protocols they made for this unrestricted bioweapon, it's not only for the toxicity for GP120. Still, we only have it for 2 years. There are a lot of things we need data. We need to understand. We need to solve the problem, no matter it's from the virus or from the vaccine, because 40% change were made on spike protein to target human. And also the other thing is they are developing more things. For example, new lab, P3 lab, is built in Wuhan again.
Thank you, Dr. Li Ming. And I really, that's got to be the answer for now.
comment.
We have a lot of questions to go.
We need to cease manufacture and destroy all the stockpile of all these vaccines. That's my comment.
Thank you. Well, that's a great comment, and I honestly, I wish we had more time, but Lee is with us for the evening, so if you can come to this evening. Next question.
Yes, can anyone elaborate on the way that the data is being collected? My main concern is for vaccine injured, and I'm aware that the hospitals are publicizing their data, telling who's vaccinated and who's unvaccinated in the hospitals. My concern is that it's skewed or misrepresented. Can we talk about that?
I'll take that on. There was a false talking point issued, I think, by somebody in the federal government or some agencies in the federal government in June that 99% of people in the hospital were unvaccinated in the United States, whereas in Israel is running just the opposite at 80%, in the UK 60% at the time. Two good papers, one by Havers from the CDC, COVID Network, and one by Fillmore from the VA. Into June, 23% of people in the hospital were vaccinated. Why? Because they know who is vaccinated and they know who's in the hospital. Claims by hospital administrators that they think, if they think they're going room to room in people in isolation and checking their vaccine cards, I can tell you they're not doing it. They are making it an assumption that they are unvaccinated. It's a false talking point. It's intentional in trying to scare people into vaccination. The 43rd UK report that just came out, the week 43 report, for the last 4 weeks, 81.8% of all the people dying of COVID in the UK are fully vaccinated. I can tell you, it's a false talking point. You should reject it. The bottom line is it's manufactured in order to create fear.
Okay, and when they're going into the hospital, if they're not 2 weeks past their last injection, they're considered unvaccinated.
Well, I can tell you right now, if they don't have their vaccine card, if they don't have their vaccine card and they're not within 2 weeks, and if nobody goes in the room to even ask them, they're considered unvaccinated. I am telling you, it is manufactured. They, by design, do not want to recognize anybody in the hospital unvaccinated. The only way to do it is look at CMS data. In August, we have CMS data now. 60% of people over 65 in the hospital are vaccinated. We can look at CDC data, VA, and CMS data, and it's nowhere close to what these hospital administrators are saying.
And then my last point is about areas in the world that are publicizing that their death rate is actually much lower because of the difference between dying from COVID and dying with COVID.
That's working. Okay, I have talked to a lot of people throughout multiple states, and in particularly in 2 large cities. I know that if you were vaccinated and they had that in the history, they would not test you for COVID. So that was skewing the numbers right there. So they're doing things to manipulate this, and you know, just don't believe what you read or what you hear, because it's not true. It really
There you
isn't.
go. Okay.
One more subtle point while you answer that
Okay,
is they say how many people are admitted with COVID. They don't say how many people are admitted with other conditions. So I think that's a subtlety that's really important.
Yeah, as I said, just so you know, when we had the Delta variant here in August, we were overloaded in our hospital with unvaccinated people. But what I have said time and time again is that overwhelmingly they did not receive early treatment outpatient, and when they came into the hospital, they were denied the right treatment, and in many cases received the wrong treatment. Okay, next.
Hi, my question concerns the regulatory takeover or capture of the FDA. So we know that the FDA favors certain politically connected pharmaceutical companies, but I think there's a misconception that the only way the FDA favors them is by accelerating the clinical trials process. Is it the case, however, that the FDA often favors these politically connected companies not by accelerating the clinical trials, but by delaying them and making the cost of getting a new drug to market so prohibitive that they destroy their upstart would-be competitors? Thank you very much.
That should be a fairly quick answer, but guys, answer that question for the gentleman. Thanks.
Okay, I'm just going to give you a case study. I work with a group that's funded by the U.S. Department of Defense. I'm a consultant for them. We've been prosecuting clinical trials right now with the FDA for almost a year and a half, trying to get approval to proceed with clinical trials on the combination of famotidine and celecoxib. We had previously also attempted to include an arm of celecoxib, famotidine, and ivermectin. Now, remember, we're talking about the FDA duking it out with the DOD. The FDA absolutely would not allow any clinical trial to proceed with ivermectin unless we went back to the bench and demonstrated in vitro the mechanism of action of ivermectin. They're now stalling us in every way they can to keep us from initiating a clinical trial in patients that are hospitalized of famotidine and celecoxib. Okay? The FDA does not act in good faith. The FDA is absolutely captured by large pharmaceutical interests, and they have a wealth of strategies for manipulating the process for not only accelerating, for instance, you heard the Pfizer announcement, okay, for their main protease inhibitor. They were able to get that thing rammed through and approved and get the trial done, well, they still won't let us get out of the blocks. The FDA is absolutely captured, and it happened when we, the people, allowed through our representatives the pharmaceutical industry to fund the FDA to regulate the pharmaceutical industry. This, the best metaphor I can think of, we're here in the South, so I can say this, is Brer Rabbit and the Briar Patch. Okay? The pharmaceutical industry said, so please don't throw me in the briar patch, okay? Because that's where they were born and lived. That's what's happened now, is they've insisted that they pay our government to regulate them, and this is what we get. Now, who's responsible for that? Our elected officials. That's all I want to say on that.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Alexander.
Sure. And just to add to this, you know, like if you look at the present trial that Pfizer brought forward 5 to 11-year-olds to the FDA, that trial for vaccination of children, you can see that as a methodologist, when I read it, you can see that there's so much misclassification bias, selection bias. There's so many wrong things with that trial methodologically that it defies logic that the FDA would even entertain that submission. But if you go to the 21st Century Cures Act, Section 3022, I think that was passed in 2016 under the Obama administration, and the FDA has regulations that specifies that they must, by law, entertain non-randomized controlled trials in their regulatory approval. So they must entertain observational studies, any sorts of non-randomized studies, etc. But they still do not. They behave, the FDA behaves as though that regulation that binds them does not exist. So when they give so much of problems and they disregard hydroxy, ivermectin, etc., and they claim that there aren't the suitable studies out there, between the randomized controlled trials and the non-randomized controlled trials, there's more than ample high-quality evidence for them to give the proper approval of those drugs. So the FDA actually, I've written Commissioner Woodcock, myself, and Peter Marks. We've been in back and forth electronically, where I show them the contravention of their act, and they know they're contravening the act right now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd like to add one last thing. You ever heard about the opioid crisis in this company called Purdue Pharma? Okay. You know who's behind that? Who's really responsible for that whole Shiza show? Janet Woodcock. Okay. We still don't have, by the way, she's timed out, she's clocked out. She's technically no longer the administrator of the Food and Drug Administration. Biden administration has just neglected to appoint a replacement. So we technically now no longer have an FDA with any senior administrator. The consequence of that is somebody who works closely with the FDA and has for decades, is that all of the underlings are going to become as cautious as possible and not let anything through. Over.
Okay, wow, that's amazing. Dr. Amberling, you have one comment on that, and then we got just a couple more questions. Any doctors out here? All right, doctors to the front, please. And that's all, I'm sorry, and then we have to finish with the docs. You can go, sir. And then thinking about the VIP function, but Dr. Amberling.
Yeah, just regarding the FDA, just important to point out in case you didn't know, Scott Gottlieb, MD, who has always been more or less of an industry flack, was the head of the FDA under Trump. He leaves the head of the FDA immediately takes a position at Pfizer. So if you want to know how they got their crappy shot approved for an emergency use authorization and then this bogus full approval, which is of course not true, just look at Scott.
Yeah, there's a lot of connections. Excellent point. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. I think a lot of people are wondering where this thing is going. And a couple of people have mentioned Geert Vanden Bossche. His work seems to suggest that we're going to see increased, more infectious variants. So if you guys agree, I'd like someone to address like where they think this is going to go.
This is a huge question. We did not talk about this today. Dr. Cole, where are we heading? Lambda variant?
The second point I just wanted to make is if it's true that it's going to get worse, then there should be some focus on telling people to get their prescriptions in advance, because doctors were overwhelmed during the Delta wave, and they just couldn't treat people.
This is so cool that you asked that question. Thank you, sir. Because this is a question I'm getting from my patients. Do I need to stay on prophylaxis with ivermectin, or can I take a break right now in Florida because the Delta variant went through? So think about how you can answer that question, guys, because we can't keep getting everybody. Okay, where are we headed, Dr. Cole? What should we do with prophylaxis? Moving on.
All right, I'll answer real briefly because I know a lot of people want to chime in this. If we're smart and follow the developing world, we could be done with this now, like India and Uttar Pradesh. More variants are going to come along. If you're COVID recovered, your body remembers 28 out of 29 proteins, doesn't care what happens to the spike, you're going to have long-lasting COVID immunity. So if we're humble and smart enough as a first world rich captured nation to follow the developing nation that's humble enough to care for their people and get our public health agencies out of the way, we're done. We're over. You get early treatment, you have it on hand, you're ready, you get COVID, you're immune, done. That's my opinion.
Thank you. That's an excellent answer.
The second part of the question is, I really think your question was the answer, which is, we need agency. Part of what I'm here for and what my implicit in my lecture is I want to give you guys agency to protect yourself, because the agencies aren't helping you. You need to be your own agent, right? And you need to prepare. Winter's coming. The variant has gotten worse, right? Delta variant had 250 times the viral load of the alpha. Now, what's key about that is that, for instance, for a drug like ivermectin, it has a dose-response relationship. We had to increase our doses. So a couple of things about as we go forward to protect yourself and prepare. I think every household should have an early treatment kit in the house for everybody in the house. That's what a lot of countries have done. And really, that's my dream, is that you should have, it should just be in your cupboard, right? And it should be a combination, because the older you are, the more comorbidities you have, the more drugs you're going to need. It should be in sufficient doses. The second part is, in order to prepare that, please visit our website, because we are really trying to work on those tools. So number one, we have a pharmacy page. We guide you on how to get these prescriptions filled. We have a list of compounding pharmacies. We have ones that ship overnight. We also have overseas ones, although customs is now starting to, confiscate some of those. So that's not a perfect solution. But we really are trying to guide you to get to the physicians, the providers that prescribe, and the pharmacies that fill. I would do it now. Now, don't wait, because here's the thing. With all the blockades that are up, guys, if you get sick, that's not when you want to run around to try to save your ass. You want to do it now, and so you don't have to rely on anyone. But I do think it should be done under the care and direction of a doctor who knows how to treat COVID, because they need to know when you're sick. Sometimes I need to titrate and escalate doses, prolong durations, and add other agents. I've had to do that for a number of patients to get them out. Ivermectin does not solve everybody. If you started early at a sufficient dose, it can go a long way, but I don't want to oversimplify this disease. A lot of times you need more than just that, and I think everybody should prepare themselves. Find your doctor now, find your pharmacist now, and have the drugs on hand. Thanks.
Just want to add one thing is, two things must do to stop all the variant and later on such pandemic. One must do is you definitely need to use drugs to treat all the symptoms. And you definitely need to let doctors do what they can do. And the second thing is, China designed it in their document, they write it as they want everlasting. And as an insider and a whistleblower, also medical doctor, I want to tell people that they are still working on more things. And I have done the interview with a state IA analyst, she clearly mentioned in that interview that her intelligence shows Delta was come out from Chinese lab. So the thing is, we should stop them to do more things. Wait. Meanwhile, do the treatment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to get a sense of who's got questions here, but the physicians, go ahead and ask. We're going to get done with this soon, but I'm so happy you're all staying. Don't go anywhere. These questions are amazing. I've heard them.
I'm Andy. I'm an MD. I'm licensed here in Florida and California. I work with a very dangerous drug. It's called marijuana. I've been recommending it for 10 years. Thoughts on CBD and the anti-inflammatory effects for preventing the cascade of really, pursuing to ARDS and THCA and potent COX-2 inhibitor.
Okay, so Randy, thanks for asking the question. Yeah. Cannabidiol, that's a super great topic. We do CBD. Does anyone here think that CBD has a therapeutic role? Go ahead.
Yeah, CBD is a really good anti-inflammatory. THC is not. THC will suppress your natural killer cells. So if you want a strong innate immune response to viruses and whatnot.
The acid form THCA, acid form COX-2 inhibitor.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is, but at the same time, as a COX inhibitor, great. But as a suppressor of natural killer cell function, it's a balance. So CBD, yes. THC, you got to be careful.
Okay, thank you very much. That's exactly what I thought you'd go with that. All right, next question.
An observation I would like to provide to the woman who spoke before. On the American Hospital Directory site, the AHD.com, they always listed their charges and profit loss per hospital. Those have been removed from that website. So that's something I just recently found out. So my question is around desaturation, and my apologies, I'm a lowly nurse, I'm not a doctor. And
you're a great nurse.
I had read a research paper in March of 2020, and I thought it was very strange that I found this paper so early on, and it mentioned about the effectiveness of HCQ because the spike proteins were binding with the heme, and I've never seen that anywhere else. And so part of my question for you guys is the difference between CPAP and vents and the effectiveness or the dangers in the hospitals. Because I've got friends that are in the hospital, they can't get ivermectin, and it's like they want to put them on vents.
Okay.
So what's your recommendations on CPAP?
Great nursing question. Because really, I have a patient like that right now. He's 80% on BiPAP, and he's been there, he's living, he's fine, but so often they're trying to intubate him. So Dr. Intensivist and Molly.
I think the answer, I'll try to make a very simple answer because the answer is quite simple. There's really only one reason ever to go on a ventilator, and that is if the work of breathing is unsustainable by the patient. And the work of breathing meaning how much work and effort they have to exert in order to inflate their lungs and exchange carbon dioxide and inhale enough to keep saturations at a certain level. If it's just a low oxygen level, they just need oxygen supplementation. They don't need a ventilator. One of the core skills of a doctor like myself, which is a lung specialist and ICU specialist, is deciding when to institute mechanical ventilator. None of us are perfect at it. In fact, everyone I've put on a ventilator, I've always felt like, did I do that too early? Or I think I did that just a little too late. So it's not a precise decision. But the one thing we learned about with COVID is this: when it started, they rushed to put people on ventilators. I think people were scared, they didn't know what they were doing, and they actually violated a really time-honored rule of mechanical ventilation, which is it's about the work of breathing and not oxygen levels. Going back to your other question, do the other ways in which we support people's breathing, do they hurt? What we know about the science of mechanical ventilation and oxygen support is the worst one is the invasive mechanical ventilator. So everything less than that, we believe, is far less injurious. So BiPAP, CPAP, high flow, heated high flow oxygen, all are less injurious. It's really, you want to try to avoid mechanical ventilator. Everything else supports them as comfortably as they can. What I try to do is you want to turn around the disease, give them as long as you can, as comfortably as they can.
I should say it's also complicated with the viral pneumonia on top.
Well, but everybody's got pneumonia with COVID. It's crazy.
Interestingly, in a case series of autopsies, this is already a year ago now, they only found what's called viral cytopathic change in the lungs in about 20% of lungs. So it's actually mostly an inflammatory condition. It's an organized pneumonia. Now, it can progress to what's called ARDS, but it's not like an infestation and destruction from the virus. It's this hyperinflammatory response. So it's the inflammation that's injuring the lungs.
And the reason I made my comment about everybody is because that's what they're calling it, COVID pneumonia in the hospital, and it is a lung infection. Dr. James, answer this question for me. Since every American, and probably every one of you, has a pulse oximeter that you can put on your finger right now, right? I wish I had invested in a pulse ox company. Wow. Tell me, at what number is it life-threatening? What number on that little pulse oximeter do you get the dissociation, with the hemoglobin?
So I think that's different in every patient. So there are two things. Number one, we see patients who are desatting into the 80s. I think there's a degree of tissue damage, hypoxemic injury that compounds the inflammatory response with that. And that's different for everybody because everyone has different comorbidities. So one of the things that we do to support those patients, though, is prone. I think prone is relatively important. If you can, get them through without having to use any positive pressure ventilation, you're much better off because the lungs are so damaged. I think that blowing air into damaged lungs is not a good thing. But there was also the happy hypoxemic that we heard about. And what I've seen is if you have patients who are okay sitting, but they get up and walk, one of the things we found early on in the pandemic is people would die. They would have a cardiac arrest walking to the bathroom. And I actually had 2 in one day. So what happens is they're so taxed that they become a little bit more hypoxemic with a little bit of exertion, and their body can't tolerate it. So be mindful if you're treating patients, if they're getting dizzy or lightheaded getting up to the bathroom, they need to be monitoring their pulse oximeter with activity and exertion as well.
Very good, thank you. Other guys?
I was just going to comment from the outpatient setting, kind of what we've seen. Exercise tolerance does seem to be a big issue in a dramatic drop in their pulse oximetry. However, we've also noticed that even just high flow oxygen, not even using BiPAP, just as high as 60, 70 liters a minute, has shown to be a dramatic difference in the barotrauma that these guys see in the ICU. But the low pulse ox for me is really the low 80s to mid 80s. I've seen the high 80s and not had.
Yeah, in other words, don't panic. I get calls at 92%, 88%. If you're walking around and talking, go ahead.
Right. I wanted to comment that in that paper I quoted by Fillmore and colleagues from the VA, that 45% of people in the hospital in that study with COVID never had an oxygen saturation below 94%. And we had data from the Seattle paramedics and the Washington State paramedics that were picking up patients, that the majority of patients actually were not in extremis. So what I'm telling you is there's a fraction of people hospitalized. They're hospitalized out of panic. And the family is panicking, the patients are panicking, and part of it is panic driven by the pulse oximeter. And I agree with Dr. Tyson. I have developed a comfort level of clearly managing oxygen saturations in the 80s at home, clearly. And I've had a couple good patients where we went below that. They were physicians and they weren't going to go to the hospital. As long as mentation is good and as long as they can make the bathroom trip and kitchen trip, it's a little bit scary to do it. When we published our first case at my hospital that died of COVID-19 early in 2020, we chronicled what happened because he had just come from New York. What happens at the very end for the cardiopulmonary collapse is right ventricular dysfunction. There is such hypoxemia, and probably, and the autopsy studies show this, microthrombi. It's microthrombi that's happening. Every single autopsy that I'm aware of, the lungs are starting to fill up with micro blood clots, and that's due to the spike protein driving hemagglutination. It's a funny type of thrombosis. It's not like a pulmonary embolus. It's not like a consolidative pneumonia. It's not like heart failure. It's different. And what I explain to patients, it's almost like going at altitude where you just feel short of breath. And if any of you had COVID, half of you raised your hand in COVID, you know what I'm talking about. If any of you had pulmonary COVID, you'll know the shortness of breath that you feel. It's a different type of shortness of breath. It's not wheezing. It's almost as if your lungs are stiff, and you just get a sense of, ooh, you just feel a little bit dizzy when you exert yourself.
And yes, and the blood thinners, Richard, you commented on that, right? We're going to definitely, you go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so I was going to just comment and just say, getting an outpatient D-dimer level is huge, as well as we also do CRPs in our office. So you see the high CRP, you see the high D-dimer, treat the microembolic
Yeah, the number of people admitted to hospitals who were not adequately anticoagulated in this country was astounding and atrocious. Okay, next.
So I was involved with the care of acute COVID patients last spring in New York's Bellevue Hospital as a nephrologist. And I just want to point out the attention to fluid balance is crucial in these patients because a lot of these folks just really had heart failure as opposed to pneumonia. So careful measurement of intake and output on a daily basis and monitoring their weight on a daily basis is absolutely crucial in the ICU management of these patients.
Thank you, Dr. Ammerling. Dr. Richard Ammerling, also one of his. Okay, a couple more docs. We got to go.
Two quick questions. One about the bioweapon. Is it true that there's an HIV component to this virus? And two, regarding the mRNAs, my patients want to know, is this going to become part of my DNA? How would you answer those?
Yeah, I see many people talk about the HIV part or inserted. The thing is, if you want to see the smoking gun, because they are talking about very short sequence insertion, so you cannot say that is smoking gun. And you also see they have changed a lot of things which had some highly suspicious function you cannot explain now. So the thing is, first, whether there is HIV or not inserted is not that important. For example, like the furin cleavage site, actually they learned from HIV, Ebola, and high pathogen avian influenza, all these things. And like ADE, they learn from dengue and also SARS-1. It's like the neurotoxicity. They study all the dangerous lethal virus which can be listed in all the bioterrorism by reagent list. So that's the thing is, we as a doctor, we see the function. What function we have, we can see before we solve the secrets of the virus, we find out the drugs to treat it. That's the only thing we can do. So before we have all this data, I think as doctors, to observe your patients, care about their response, and try the drug, do the treatment, that is the best way. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take the prerogative of having, thank you, Rebecca Peck, about the messenger RNA. We'll have to hold off on that for just now. I want to close with Dr. Boros. These other questions are superb, but we're going to stick around for a few minutes right after this panel, again, because we have a break over there for the VIP. But Dr. Boros came up here from the Florida Keys, has had a rough day today. Share what's going on, Bruce, Dr. Boros.
First of all, they always say, when you lose an elder, you lose a library. You lose a library. My father passed away this morning from complications of COVID. I've been fighting COVID like all of these people and many of you in the room since July of last year. It's a thankless job. Everybody's been beat up. Everybody on that stage has taken more flack than anybody can ever imagine. And that's why seeing this, what I call the shot heard around the world, but not a vaccine shot, is so important, because everybody's been fighting in a piecemeal fashion, doing what they can bit by bit. And to see everybody here, to see this live stream going around the world is the pushback that finally the truth is going to be heard. It's going to be told. And in honor of my dad, Carl Arfra, World War II veteran. I've been on ivermectin for 16 months, my wife and I. I'm in and out of my 3 urgent cares. I'm a board-certified cardiologist, and I've never felt healthier in my life. 16 months. I have no antibodies, and people often say, well, the question that nobody really here can answer is, how long can you take ivermectin? Because there's no longitudinal studies on it. Well, you're looking at least one person who's gone through 16 months of prophylaxis, and I feel great. I would also like to say that in the question that came up, and again, these people are all tired. We're all tired, but these people are constantly on the go, giving of themselves. We might think, oh, that's cool. I'm with Joe Rogan, and I'm getting interviewed, and I want to thank their wives. I want to thank their spouses, because without my wife and without the people supporting them, okay, we would be in the dark ages still. We would be in the dark ages. This is as Dr. McCullough says, it's in their DNA. It's in their DNA, our DNA, to be doing what we're doing. It's incredible. My father was on ivermectin with me prophylactically, and being a WW2 guy, 97 years old, he decided he didn't want to be in a line of 200 cars waiting to get a vaccination. He'd been brainwashed. We have been so brainwashed by our medical unleadership. The FDA, the CDC, the NIH, they're funded by Big Pharma. They're not going to tell us anything that's the truth. They're just tell us what Big Pharma wants us to hear. Covered by mainstream media, we're losing our First Amendment capabilities. The only way that we can do anything to invoke change is by helping these people be out, spreading the word, grassroots efforts, and every one of you should be calling your legislators, who are all on the dole, and saying, I'm not going to vote for you unless you start taking the handcuffs off the doctors. We need to be able to get you therapy. I need to be able to write a prescription and not have the pharmacy call me up and say, what's the ICD code for that? What's the reason you're using that? Oh, we don't give it out for COVID. We don't do that. This is constant. Every day it's getting worse and worse and worse. And by a grassroots effort, all of you telling all of your friends and letting everybody know what the truth is, we're slowly fighting back. This is the biggest shot heard for our side. We have been so suppressed. I've never seen anything like this in medicine in my life. So my only question now that I do have one question, and again, I thank you all. Pierre's been there for me many nights. You're all... In the case of my father, who decided he wanted to get to the front of the line because he was like Sergeant Bilko and say, hey, I'm WW2, can I drive my car up there? And my young girlfriend at 88 and he at 97 wanted, because the government told him he's a good soldier, I want to get my vaccination. They moved him right to the front of the line. He got it. He didn't tell me. I was very upset. I wanted to give him a spanking. He got both jabs, then he got COVID. And then he went down the tubes when he got COVID. One problem after the other. I was with him 5 days ago and I said, Dad, what should I do? I've been fighting for 2 years to get the message out, to treat people, to take care of people. And he said, you go to where the living are. Be with the living and help the living. Help the living like everybody's doing right here. My father, 2 months ago, should I have maintained him on prophylactic ivermectin after he got vaccinated? We're seeing astronomical numbers of deaths in people that have been vaccinated, particularly the older people, the Israeli studies, right? 25% higher death rate in the vaccinated people going into the ICUs. I feel a little guilty. Should I have kept it on ivermectin prophylaxis after getting vaccinated?
Thank you, Bruce. Dr. Boros, thank you. That's a tough story. The question being, you've heard it, vaccinated and then...
I'm sorry for your loss, Bruce. I'm heartfelt, and so I'm sorry. This is a message that we miss. We get this, get a shot, 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 shot. But they don't tell you that after you get the shot, it modulates your immune response downward. You're a sitting duck because your broad, non-specific antibody response from the rest of your body has gone down. You haven't ramped up a response to a spike protein, albeit the wrong spike protein. So you're a sitting duck after you get that shot. In the elderly, they're already slightly immune suppressed being elderly, vitamin D deficient in most of the elderly. And so you now have a very immune suppressed individual after the shots that are literally wide open for secondary attack. Now there were some studies in some, I don't remember which week, 28, 26, somewhere out of the UK weekly data where they showed individuals over age 50 that got the shot died at a higher rate after getting the shot. That should be public health messaging if we had a public health agency teaching public health. As to the ivermectin prophylaxis, you know, since they are immune suppressed, at least it has mechanisms to inhibit viral replication.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what he said. The vaccine, Bruce, you're with the living today. We love you and sorry about your father. But two things. One, the vaccine doesn't stop transmission and it doesn't stop infection. So yes, you should prophylax.
Okay. Last comment, Dr. Corey?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, Bruce, I'm sorry to hear about your father. I mean, we learn as we go, right? You know, we were told, and everyone's told, that the vaccines were protective against serious outcomes in the elderly. Doubtful it was going to hold up as much as they said. We know there's waning efficacy. You know, should every vaccinated person take ivermectin? I don't know what the downside is. Again, it's an absurdly safe medicine. And going back to what you said before, yeah, we don't have long-term studies on it. How long should we take it? But, you know, I sometimes look at the analogy, you know, the vast majority of the adult population in the United States takes 1 or 2 medicines a day, whether it be a statin, an aspirin, or a blood pressure drug, or diabetes drug, for decades. Right? And we're talking about taking ivermectin once or twice a week, an absurdly safe drug. And so, although we don't have the longitudinal aspects, I do think it's reasonably safe. In the middle of a pandemic, during these surges, I think it's reasonable to take. I'm going to add one little sort of cutting-edge insight into ivermectin prophylaxis. It's coming out of Brazil. It's a paper on my computer sent to me by one of our FLCCC colleagues in Brazil, a guy named Flavio Carajani. And they have studied about 200,000 patients in a Brazilian city called Itajai. I probably butchered it, but they're looking at about 120,000 people on prophylaxis. And what they've had very good data on cumulative dose, and they're finding this dose of 220 milligrams or somewhere around then. Once you hit that cumulative dose, they found no more hospitalizations and no more deaths. They could not find a mortality in someone who had reached this cumulative dose. And so I think it's really interesting data, and I think it hopefully will serve as a further guide. And then in addition, we have Dr. Hector Carvalho, who's kind of the king of ivermectin as a prophylaxis agent. He, from the beginning, had 10 weeks on, 4 weeks off, and that's how he does it. And he found there were no breakthroughs during those periods. So I think how long, what is the safest way, what's the best way to do it, we're going to learn as we go. And that's, I go back to our protocols, we evolve with the data. As we learn more, we'll adjust and then offer guidance. So we learn as we go. Thanks.
This is a great way to end a great day. No, we're going to have to, well, just tell me and I'll tell them. Dr. Cannon, go ahead.
I'm Dr. Cannon, and I was wondering if anybody wanted to be ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine independent, like being energy independent as a nation. How about we be ivermectin, and how about we have manufacturing ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine in Texas, in these states, please?
In America. In America, yes. Made in America. And let's not rely on America. Well, here's what's going to happen after this. From Dr. Corey to the right is going to be in the first room over here on the far wall after this room, and from Dr. Cole to the left, and I'll take care of Dr. Ammerling and Li Ming, but you 5, all right, 5 and 5, break up. And I just want to say this in closing, and so for all you had the VIP tickets, you're there, 6 to 7 tonight, if you're a physician, meet us at the Ocala Garden Hilton. Florida physicians, and that includes the very courageous residents who are here that I met from Orlando, residents, house staff physicians who are being ostracized and rejected by their peers as they're learning how to be doctors, including, I just approached me, so God bless you, please come there. What this group of doctors has done for America has to provide hope. That's the biggest thing. When patients are cured, when patients get better, and we throw stuff at them, we don't always know if it's the stuff that's making them better or just the hope that they're going to be healed, that they can trust their doctors. And that's what we're giving patients with all of this incredible brain power here. So thank you all for sharing hope and being the light for the world. God bless us all. Thank you all.